right? Normally, we will think about security as a software problem.
Right.
But then that relies on a powerful processor that can run whatever protection or algorithm encryptions you want to do. But in this extremely scaled, resource-constrained device, you don't have that access. So what we do is we use specialized hardware and special chip designs to support security functions that are at a similar strength as the conventional approach, but only take orders of magnitude smaller area and power.
This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm Nate Potker. Innovative medical technologies are transforming how treatment is approached for modern Americans. From helping to control seizures to pacemakers and insulin pumps, implantable medical devices are creating new therapeutic and monitoring solutions for many complex health conditions. However, these smart devices need to record and transmit the most private data wirelessly, and that opens up the potential for malicious attacks. We're joined by Kaiyuan Yang, assistant professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Rice University. Among the projects in his Secure and Intelligent Microsystems Lab is one working to protect implantable medical devices from cyber threats. Professor Yang, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me.
So how might hackers or a malicious agent be able to disrupt a medical device that's implanted in someone else?
There are generally two approaches. So the first one is through cyber attacks, because nowadays, most of these medical devices have internet access. They may not be directly connected to the internet, but it will be through some gateways. And then someone, for example, the patient itself or the doctors, they may have the login information. And then an attacker could use this kind of social engineering, right, like a fake website or other ways to steal these passwords. And then they will bypass all the security protections in this internet channel and then get direct access to the device. The other types of cyber attacks, such as they could impersonate to be something trusted, and then interpret the communication between the legitimate server and the implant to modify the message sent to the implant. And then another angle is physical attacks. So that is through, one is to interfere with the wireless communication, because typically these medical devices, they have special protocols and physical mechanisms for wireless communication. You can try to interfere with that or do other things on the communication side. And also you can use interference to change the sensor data. There has been reported demonstrations of using ultrasound or other RF interference to modify the data being collected by the sensor and then needed to make wrong decisions.
Do medical devices in the wireless spectrum, like I'm familiar with like in-ear monitors and kind of in the audio world and thinking about radio broadcasts and now with our phones, like 5G, different kind of bandwidths that happen. Do biomedical devices need to work in a specific kind of frequency area?
It's a great question. There's not a consensus on that yet. Most of the commercially available devices, they tend to be on the larger size. They typically adopt commercial radios, which means they're at the gigahertz range or at least several hundreds of megahertz range that allow them to radiate to a further distance. But then the challenge with this is their RF signal is being absorbed by the human tissue. Right. And the higher frequency you go, the more absorption there will be. And that will cause heating and safety problem and ultimately limit how much energy you can send out. So for more recent research, especially like ours, that we try to build millimeter scale implants, in these cases, we tend to use lower frequency mechanisms to send out wireless signal. And we are not only using traditional electromagnetic waves, we also use acoustic waves or other mechanisms to reduce the size of the transmitter and receivers that's required for the implant.
What kind of interference or other RF signals might get in the way of your millimeter scale devices?
So the benefits of going to this lower frequency are twofold. So on one hand is to give you better safety limits, right? Because at lower frequency, the amount of energy you can send out can transmit through the body will be much higher. So it's safer. And then on the other hand, because this will sit at a very different frequency from the more traditional like radio frequency bands, it will suffer from less interference. So we will always have a low pass filter to only focus on the frequency that's of interest to the millimeter scale device. So that will improve the resilience towards this interference.
Very cool. What are some of the techniques your lab is exploring to make these kind of devices more secure?
So as I mentioned, there are two sides of the challenge. Ideally, your solution needs to handle both. So one of our most recent work, we are trying to provide two-factor authentication to these bioimplants so that when the credentials, login credentials from the doctor or the patient get lost, the attacker won't be able to easily get into the device and modify its parameters or steal the data. The challenge with achieving this two-factor authentication is that think of our normal process, right? You have a cell phone. The cell phone is bonded to this user. And then the cell phone has a screen, so it can receive this message. And then you have your keyboard for your computer, which you can enter this passcode, right? But for a bioimplant, we do not have this monitor and this keyboard. So we need to have a way to reliably send a fresh key, random number into the implant. And the implant must be able to recognize that and log you in. In order to do this within a millimeter scale device, we must have a good way to enter this number. And what we realize is our device are always powered by external power transmitter because we want to make it battery free, or it can work with a very small battery that is recharged constantly. In this sense, when you move the external transmitter, the power transfer efficiency will change. The amount of power you receive will be dependent on the alignment between the external transmitter and the implanted device. So we utilize this as a mechanism to enter the passcode. So we call this a mechanical input. And the good thing for this is it is almost a free add-on to the existing power transfer scheme. It does not require any additional sensors or additional input port. It just uses the existing power transfer link and the power receiving circuits. We are able to detect the user entered pattern from outside. And this gives us the keyboard to enter this new random number.
Very cool. If there was like an emergency access case where like a paramedic needed to get in, how would they get through that two-factor?
Yes, wonderful question. That's one of the unique challenge for doing the authentication in medical devices, because we have to consider emergency scenario. And we must assume that in the emergency scenario, the first responders may not have access to your password. So we have to disable or modify the implant. So what we do with that is our protocol. We build a complete full stack security protocol for this. We do have an emergency mode. And in emergency mode, we also use this second factor mechanical input, but we will bypass the first factor, which is the password. And the way to make sure this second factor is secure, it's we utilize the distance bound for our communication scheme. So because our communication is at a low frequency, and then we have a very clear understanding of how far it can transmit. And we know exactly, like, given this amount of power for transmission, how long the communication will be. So we can guarantee that only someone who has a receiver that's placed, for example, 10 centimeter near the implant will be able to receive a fresh random number. And then the person who receives this random number can move your variable transmitter to enter the passcode. So the assumption here is the patient is supposed to be aware of these operations because, right? Because the person who manipulate this, they first need to place the receiver very close to your body to receive the fresh code, and then they have to move your power transmitter to enter the passcode. So the way is we design this passcode to be long enough so that someone who maybe just catch you temporarily in a bus or a railway won't have enough time to do all these things. But also it's not too long so that it's compromise the convenience. So we try to strike a balance in choosing a proper length of the passcode.
Are there challenges with scale? Like in your secure and intelligent microsystems lab, you're working on tiny scale things. Are there problems getting some of these features down to that size?
Yes, definitely. That's actually one of the key research thrusts for our lab. We are trying to build security solutions for these ultra small and ultra low power systems, not only for biomedical, but also for generic Internet of Things devices. The challenge here is you have very limited hardware resource, which means you can only have a very small chip or some limited number of off-chip components for your security function. The energy budget is extremely restricted. Traditionally, we do all the security scheme. We have all the open source libraries to do them in software. Right? Normally, when you think about security, it's a software problem.
Right.
But then that relies on a powerful processor that can run whatever protection or algorithm encryptions you want to do. But in this extremely scaled resource-constrained device, you don't have that access. So what we do is we use specialized hardware and special chip designs to support security functions that are at a similar strength as the conventional approach, but only take orders of magnitude smaller area and power. And these include components for random number generation. As I mentioned, we need fresh keys for all of the security protocol stuff. So we have built-in low-power random number generator. We have a physically unclonable function which provides a device unique ID and secret keys for each implant. And then we have low-power security encryption engines. So we can perform symmetric key AES encryptions and also hashing operations within this millimeter scale implant. So it's really, we put a lot of our efforts in these individual components and then integrate them together into this bioimplant platform, which enables this two-factor authentication capability for this implant.
Very cool. As you're thinking about rolling these out in the future, are you considering some of the technology impacts as like hackers get used to using supercomputers and AI kind of techniques? Are you trying to future-proof the security functions in that way?
So I would say in our current scheme, it has some kind of future proof, but we have to see what happens in the future. And security is always we call it a cat and rat problem.
Right.
So most of the supercomputers and quantum computing attacks are targeting public key cryptography. And in our scheme, we are not using public key cryptography because that is too expensive in terms of power and hardware requirements.
Right.
So there are post-quantum cryptographic algorithms. They have recently been approved by NIST. So there are recommended algorithms for post-quantum cryptography. MANLab is also looking into that. So we are building this dedicated hardware that can support those kind of post-quantum algorithms within a small power budget. And then the other side that technology advancements may impact this security scheme is there could be more powerful wireless receivers and sensors so that may break our distance bound. In that case, as I mentioned, we have a clear understanding of the signal-to-noise ratio versus the amount of power we put out of the implant. So we could dynamically adjust this power level to make sure that even if your receiver sensitivity is improved by 10 dB, we can still guarantee that at a certain distance, you won't be able to get sufficient information to decode the random code. Right? So there's no perfect security, and you have to have an understanding of the capability of the attacker and then try to make it difficult or impossible for attackers with the given capability.
From this point in time, kind of what is your path forward to getting this into commercial applications or to where the average person might have it in their personal device?
We have been working on this bioimplants for probably 7 to 8 years. It's mostly a collaboration with my colleague at Rice, Jacob Robinson. So we have been developing this magnetoelectric-based bioimplant platform. We actually already started a company that tried to commercialize this, and we are going through the process of getting it prepared for FDA approval and to do first-in-human studies. The first therapeutic targets for our commercial device, it's mental health. So we try to use electrical stimulation to help alleviate depression.
Professor Yang, can you tell us a little bit about how NSF support has impacted your work?
NSF support has been tremendous for our research. One of our initial grants with Dr. Robinson was through the Ascent program under the engineering directory. It helped us build the basic platform for this biomedical device. So it supports us to build the various communication, various power and networking capabilities. And then after that, I got my career award, which funds the efforts to make it more secure and more reliable. And based on these technologies we built and supported by these two grants, we are also getting other federal agencies to support more application-specific usage and developments of this work. So now we have other for more like pain relief, for cardiac applications, and also for neural disorders. So it's really helped us like kickstart all these efforts, and now we have multiple target applications that's under development.
Fantastic. So thinking about those target applications, I guess, for my last question, I want to ask you about what's coming up next in your work. Where do you see this work going in the next few years?
I say on the clinical side, we are trying to make the very basic function, because now there's not a single commercially available millimeter scale implant. So we want to be one of the first to get that really delivered to the patient. So to do that, we need to make our power transfer, communication, sensing, and stimulation, these four basic functions, to be as reliable as possible, right? As you can imagine, we want these things to be super reliable and trusted. And that's our first goal in terms of the clinical side. And we also want to better understand the clinical impacts that we can bring with such a new tool for the doctors. And then on the research side, we are trying to build more advanced functions into these devices, such as we want to have closed loop neuromodulations, which means we want the device to be able to sense the signal in real time and then make decisions using artificial intelligence or other decision-making capabilities, and then determine the stimulation patterns, the electrical or optical stimulations that will best help the patient. This is not possible today. Today, the typical flow is the doctor needs to adjust this manually, and they don't have a very direct indicator to tell them whether this is working or not. So it's a very lengthy process, right? The patient has to go back, return to the clinic many times to adjust the parameters, and maybe they find a good parameter, but after a year, the parameter will change because the study of the patient will change over time. So I think one of the holy grail for this is we want to achieve the closed loop. This will require a new understandings of maybe neuroscience, the clinical side, new algorithms, and also new hardware support. As we want to add AI or other more advanced signal processing to the device, we face the same power problem as security. So we have to build very efficient hardware that can support these AI models and to support this closed loop operation. Our device will evolve into different form factors. Some of them, we try to make it as small as possible. And then they have a few electrical channels. They can record from a few channels and they can stimulate a few channels. These are for therapeutic effects. And then we can also scale up the platform to support hundreds or even thousands of channels for recording and stimulation. That will become the so-called brain-machine interface. And that opens up new ways to interact with the human brain and to have a lot of more futuristic applications like prosthetics or robotic arms that's being controlled by the mind. Like companies like Neuralink have made a lot of progress towards that goal. But in terms of the hardware platform and the technology foundation, I think there's a lot of research that needs to be done to really support that vision. So we are also working towards that goal.
Special thanks to Kaiyuan Yang. For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Potker. Please subscribe wherever you get podcasts, and if you like our program, share with a friend and consider leaving a review. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.